I've been procrastinating for quite some time before deciding to make this video. I know I was supposed to make it earlier this week, but as I say, I was procrastinating and also taking on doing something else. But I was much more reading into different declaration and communique that came out of Beijing after the FOCAC because I wanted to understand exactly what was that FOCAC was about, what really African country got out of this FOCAC, and what was really the future of China-Africa relation. And today, after this week of reading, I was quite comfortable to make this video. So come with me, and we are going to look into what this FOCAC was about. My name is Christian Geraud. I'm the Africa editor of the China Global South Project, and today I'm going to take you into reading what the FOCAC was about. Few weeks back, I've made a video that was about reading between the lines of what China-Africa relation would be about, especially during the FOCAC, giving the central topic and giving the different declaration that was coming out of Chinese authorities. And after last week FOCAC, after different meetings, after different declaration, it was really quite interesting to try to understand what that FOCAC was about. So this video is going to be a bit long, but not that long. It's going to be a bit long though, where I'm going to go through few different points to kind of give you my takeaways out of this China-Africa forum. That was a summit that was happening in Beijing last week. And you're going to leave the comment and you're going to tell me what do you think of it and what was the lesson, what was the takeaway that you took out of this FOCAC. So I'm going to be looking into 4 points. So the first point is going to be the attendance. What's to say about that? Who was there? Who was not there? What was something to highlight about that point? Second point to be about what countries got out of this FOCAC, really what the head of state came for. Did they get what they wanted? Did they really went back home with something substantial to show for to their countrymen? Third point will be what this FOCAC was about. That will be where I'm going to be sharing my lesson and my highlights and what I think the future of China-Africa relation will look like and what I think that we should be paying attention to. And the fourth point will be my final comment and the side notes and the anecdotes that come up during the FOCAC and maybe something to highlight. So let's start by point 1, attendance. Who was there? Who was not there? That was the question. In terms of number, what do we know from Chinese authorities and from what we've been reading? So we know we had 53 out of 54 African delegation being present during this FOCAC. Why 54? Because there's still one country that's not recognizing China because still keeping relationship with Taiwan. It's Eswatini, the former Swaziland. So Swaziland, of course, was not part of the FOCAC. So out of the 53 that recognized China and as one China and Taiwan being part of China, all of them were there. So out of the 53 countries, we had 35 or 36 head of state from my own account. 36 head of state when I say I'm counting president only and prime minister in countries where prime minister holds powers. But yes, 36 head of states and remaining were prime ministers, vice presidents, special envoy or foreign affairs ministers. So we China had a very good run with this FOCAC with 53 head of state, and few countries in the world can really pretend to have such convening power, to be able to gather that many African head of state in one place. It's something really that's worth noticing, and that kind of tells you the enthusiasm that many African countries or head of state at least still do have about the China-Africa Forum. Personally, I was not expecting that much of attendance for few reasons. First reason was the fact that China-Africa relation has changed in the last 5-6 years, I would say even 7 years, especially when China had stopped giving some lending to Africa, and many African countries have been quote unquote complaining about the fact that they couldn't get access to Chinese financing the way they used to be. They used to have to get billions of dollars to be used for infrastructure. So since China was not really giving money to African countries anymore, it was quite doubtful to see if there was the turnover for this FOCAC is going to be high. And I was wrong because I was betting around 20 to 25 head of state. I was way off base. We had 36 head of state plus other high level representation. So China did well in terms of attendance. So second point, why I think why I was skeptical about that, it was the fact that there is in the continent in the last few years a sentiment of fatigue of those Africa Plus One summit. Now everyone is having a Africa Plus One summit. We had the US Africa Summit, the France Africa Summit, the Italy Africa Summit, the South Korea Africa Summit, and the week just before the FOCAC with Indonesia Africa Summit. So when you take all of that, you have the feeling that many head of states, many civils, many head of state would not be attending, but surprisingly, a lot of them were present. That tells you how much China still has that influence in terms of in terms of convening power, in terms of influencing the continent, in terms of being able to convince African head of states to be present. And I think China played the game well, especially for this FOCAC. They announced the date 3-4 months earlier, which is kind of unusual. They made it public and they really sent that invitation. And my reading was China was trying to do that because it wanted to make sure that as much as African head of state will be coming, in the sense where we sent invitation earlier. So the one who got invitation on time still had 3-4 months to plan to be able to say, I'm going to be attending the FOCAC. Those who are not going to be there, they would basically need pretty much strong reason not to be there, or those who won't be sending delegation be like, why aren't you sending delegation, or snubbing China or what? But China really made sure that if one country was like, I won't be attending FOCAC, it would have been really hard for that country not to attend, given the fact that invitation was sent way earlier, months earlier. So that was quite interesting for China. Of course, China used that attendance as a selling point on how much FOCAC was a success, how much Africa is still with China, or how much Africa is still working and still interested by China, and that tells you a lot. And for that, I'm gonna share with you a picture, so just so you have an idea what we are talking about in terms of attendance. So when we look at this picture here, what do we see? We see basically we have everyone that's there in terms of big countries present. We have Bola Tinubu, president of Nigeria, being here. On the side there, I remember people kind of commenting like, why Bola Tinubu, president of Nigeria, knowing how much Nigeria is important. It's one of the top 5 African country that has a good trade relationship with China. How he was that far not close here. My answer to that is quite simple. Chinese diplomatic protocol is quite complex. We could still ask why we had Emerson Mnangagwa here, knowing how many billions of dollars Chinese mining companies have been putting in Zimbabwe lithium, and how much Zimbabwe is relying on China. Would have expected Emerson Mnangagwa to be closer to Xi Jinping, but he was there. So I won't really be paying attention to why he was there, why he was on the extreme side here, why he was not closer or whatever, but this is just side note. But in this picture, when you look at this picture, you're going to notice, for those who've been following China-Africa relation, you're going to notice one big absent in this family picture. And that absence was President Lourenço from Angola. Angola, whose president was absent and sent the Foreign Affairs Minister Tete Antonio, which was somewhere here in the back here representing Angola. And for me, it was something quite noticeable, because I was wondering why Angola did not show up, knowing that they still owe China $18 billion out of the $45 billion they contracted over the years. They still have good relationship with China, even though in the last few years we've seen their bilateral relation being cooling down a bit. China has lost the influence it had in Angola. And of course, if it was not for Angola selling China oil to repay its debt, even should Angola dropped in China as China among China oil suppliers. So when you take all of that, you kind of like, yeah, Angola and China, they used to be friend and cozy, but Joao Lourenço was not there. Especially, I was reading an article where they say that in March, when he was invited, he said he was going to be there. And in March, he even came to Beijing. He had a state visit in China. He had a bilateral meeting with President Xi Jinping. And we were expecting to see Joao Lourenço himself being present, but he was not there. And this is something to notice. So what does it mean? Is it a message? Was he sending a message to, I don't know, to China or to the US, whoever, to say, I'm not aligning, I'm not picking side or whatever? But this is something noticeable. And I think the weeks to come and the months to come will be telling us much more about that decision of Joao Lourenço not coming during this FOCAC. But his absence did not stop Angola signing deals and MOUs with Chinese companies in transport and services and new technology as well. I'm going to be putting notes on this video so you can find different highlights for you, highlighted points on that. So talking about Angola's deal, this is the perfect segue to send me to the second point of this video. So the second point of this video is what African country got during this FOCAC. So what African country did get during this FOCAC? This is the big question that many are asking themselves, because when you talk about FOCAC, when you have so high level of attendance, people will be expecting what we're gonna get, what our president or prime minister wants to get there. So what do we get in general? So in general, we have a number that's been making the headlines of many newspaper and news outlets out there. It's the $50.7 billion. This is the overall envelope that China is going to dedicate for Africa for the next 3 years. I want to read it here so we kind of know what is it about. So $50.7 billion. It's not what only Chinese investment in Africa. It's going to be a mix of what China is going to do. So we're going to have a credit line. For credit line, China is going to put $30 billion over the next 3 years. Those credit line can be used for Chinese company looking to export, using as export credit to be to export in Africa, or to do business, or to be covered in insurance and everything. So those 30 billion can be part of that. We're also going to have assistance in various form of $11.27 billion. So yes, that's going to be humanitarian assistance or any disaster going to come on the continent. This is what China has put aside for that. Investment in Africa, $9.9 billion, which is quite odd because that investment coming from private sectors mainly can be easily covered when we know that Chinese companies are putting billions in lithium in Zimbabwe, or same with cobalt. CIMOC, for instance, pointing 2.5 billion its TFM and KFM project in the DRC. Seeing Chinese investment in Mali in critical minerals and elsewhere, Simandou project. That number of 9.9 billion can be reached easily even before the 3 years. My mind will be the next 1 year, 1 year and a half. Just taking those investment, those numbers will be reached so easily. So in overall envelope, we are talking about $50.7 billion that China is going to put into its final its engagement with Africa. Is it going to be the only amount of money China is going to put? Not true, but I believe that they're going to be much more than that. We don't have the numbers there's no commitment that China took in terms of trade in this time around, because I think they got the lesson from the last commitment they took in the last FOCAC when they were talking about $300 billion in terms of exchange with China, with Africa, where many were expecting to be 300 billion per year in terms of export and import from Africa, which did not happen. But they twisted it around by saying that, yes, when we took from December 2021 to July 2024, the all amount of China-Africa trade, we surpassed that number by reaching $300.7 billion. So yeah, I think they got the lesson. So this time around, no numbers, no commitment about trade. What else do we get out of this FOCAC? Chinese commitment to lift all imports, taxes, and tariffs for low-income countries, which is not only in Africa, but also elsewhere in Latin America and Southeast Asia, meaning that many African countries will be able now, they were still able, but to export to China free tariffs on imports, so the product won't be able to pay tariffs when they be imported to China. This is a good news, knowing that many African countries have been complaining about the fact that, in terms of trade, China is first Africa trade partner, but yet it's unbalanced. There is a lot of trade deficits in many African countries, and there is a need for China to balance the trade with Africa. And the question was like, what measure China can take to make that happen? The measure China took is like, I'm gonna be opening my market to allow any LDC, low-income countries to import free of tariff to China. But the question will be, how many African countries do have a solid manufacture landscape to be able to produce manufactured products that's going to be attractive to the Chinese market and consumers? And I think that's going to be the real challenges for many African countries to be able to take advantage of that opportunity out of this FOCAC. So what else did we get in terms of commitment? China will be building centers. The commitment will be building training centers in governance, where they plan to train African and to exchange views with African political parties, leaders, in understanding how governance can happen, where they can really understand better. I'm not gonna dwell much into that because I'm gonna get into that in the next point of this video. So, training in education, vocational centers, training with medical centers, building hospitals in Africa, agriculture, sending agriculture experts on the continent, helping to improve Africa agricultural yield, and once again, yes, training security and security sectors. So those are the overall what came out of this FOCAC. Of course, when you read the Beijing Action Plan and the President Xi Jinping keynote speech, you're gonna get a few of those elements out of those documents. I'm gonna put the link in the show so you can have access, you can read them and understand what got up to that. So beside that, we had few now bilateral talks, because almost all of them who attended the FOCAC, they had bilateral talks with President Xi Jinping. So some of them got MOUs, some of them got some deals, some of them got some promises, and we had some good numbers to show. Some of them had some good numbers to show among the deals that countries got on a bilateral level. So I'm going to be highlighting few of them here. They're not the only ones, but those are the few of them that caught our eyes on China Global South. So we had the DRC that signed a memorandum of understanding with China Molybdenum to build solar power plants in the country. So Nigeria signed an MOU with China Civil Engineering Construction and Sino-African to build a steel foundry in Kogi State, and China Road and Bridge Corporation signed a $3.3 billion to build a chemical plant and industrial park in Bayelsa State in Nigeria. On the clean energy side, Namibia signed a project where China New Energy Development will going to build the country's largest solar power plant, which is interesting because that in that project, 80% of the fund will be coming from the German Development Bank, where we're going to be having a trilateral cooperation in this case. In South Africa, there was security cooperation where when China Minister of Security, Public Security met with South Africa Minister of Police, they talked about cooperation and how the both of them can exchange views, training to improve security forces in South Africa, and especially address the criminality that's impacting many Chinese community in South Africa. So those are the few deals that few African countries got during this FOCAC. And of course, we had a deal with Mali, with Noranco providing weapons to Mali, which is not really something new, but it's something worth noticing. I read somewhere that Gabon had this business meeting. By the way, it was not the only country that did that. Few countries, the DRC, Zambia, Gabon, they made those business meetings, investing moment where they were investing Chinese businessmen to talk about their country. And from Gabon, we had a number of $40.3 billion. That's really we're going to have to see what does it mean exactly in terms of Chinese commitment. So I think those are the different numbers that came out of the different MOUs that have been signed during those events. So yeah, this is basically what many African countries got. Is it a lot, or is it not that much, or it was not worth the trip? That's going to be difficult to say. What I can say, with the amount of MOU that have been signed, it really depends on us, on African countries, how much pressure, what are we going to do, the follow-up we're going to make sure that China delivers when it comes to those MOUs. Because in terms of MOUs, China is used to sign a lot of MOUs with African countries, but those MOUs are not the same. Talking about MOUs, there is one particular MOU that was really quite interesting, and that's very much different of any kind of MOUs or deal that have been signed during this FOCAC. And these pictures is highlighting that MOUs. And I think this picture is going to be maybe the main outcome in terms of what Africa got during this FOCAC. This picture will say something. In this picture, we have Chinese President Xi Jinping, Zambian President Hakainde Hichilema, Tanzanian President Samia Suluhu, co-presiding the signature of a memorandum of understanding over the Tazara Railway. We remember, for those who've been following us, we've covered that project about the Tazara, that China has won the contract to rehabilitate, to modernize the Tazara Railway, the Tanzania-Zambia Railway that they've built in 1976, and where thousands of Chinese workers have died while building this railway. So that railway is quite important in a context of geopolitical tension, where the US and Europe with Global Gateway and PGI are really interested into Lobito Corridor in Angola, trying to invest and to modernize that, and to modernize the Benguela Railway and the Lobito Corridor, and allow them to have access to the DRC, Zambia hinterland of mining, to be able to export cobalt and copper and minerals coming out of those regions. And on the other side, on the Indian Ocean side, we have the Tazara Railway that's going to connect Zambia going to Tanzania and going through the port of Dar es Salaam. So we're going to have a very interesting situation to follow up there. So this picture here, this MOU here, is different for the simple fact that it's coming after months of negotiation that was happening between the Chinese, the Zambians, and Tanzanians over that railway. The company has been chosen, the amount of money to invest has been chosen. It's going to be $1 billion to be put in this project. And we have, during this recording, I was reading, and we had much more details. We are talking the details of that MOU. We are hearing that's going to be about 30 years of concessional contract, where there will be private-public partnership with China Railway and the Tanzania authorities, and they're going to invest $1 billion. So it's going to be really quite interesting to see how the Tazara is going really to change the landscape of the logistic of minerals in that region of Africa. So yes, with that in mind, definitely if you're in DC, if you're in London, if you're Paris, you kind of have to wonder, is it now worthy to put that much money on Lobito and Benguela, knowing that the bulk of the bulk of trade of that region happen on the Indian Ocean side. So the Tazara will be a blessing for many who are doing business with China, with Southeast Asia, with different countries on the Indian Ocean side. So with Tazara, unless there is a good traffic of trade happening on the other side, on the Atlantic coast, I really wonder what's going to be the future. So I'm not going to allude to anything or to pretend to allude to anything, but it should be really interesting to see at the end which project is going really to be viable, sustainable for the investors. So anyway, this MOU was quite the interesting part. So having said that, now I'm looking at the time, I realize that I'm really going overboard. So I'm going to really speed through to what this FOCAC meant and what was for me the lesson of this China-Africa Forum Summit in Beijing. What this FOCAC was about, what was the lesson? For me, I believe that this FOCAC was highly political. It was about China building alliance and strengthening its alliance with African countries in a way to get Africa work with China into what China is looking into shaping the new international system. And it was really quite interesting in his keynote speech where President Xi Jinping from the get-go really set the tone of the conversation by identifying China and Africa on the same situation, being the victim of a Western modernization that really created problems in many countries in the global south. And the reality is many countries in the global south identified with that as well. So when you look into its keynote speech, when you look into the Beijing Action Plan, it's really quite interesting to see the spaces where China is going to be present, vocational training, hospitals and agricultural places and everything. People tend to look into FOCAC through the big numbers, how much money China is going to put there, how much, 50 billion, 60 billion, 70 billion. And I do believe that it's quite short-sighted when you want to understand the future of China relation. I even wrote a paper on that where I was saying that China is locked in Africa, and it's not leaving Africa anytime soon. And when you read the document that came out of this FOCAC, you understand that yes, China is there to stay. It's not going to leave. That's one thing that really caught my attention is the fact that China is talking about political parties in Africa, training political parties and leadership, and talking about how to share experience in terms of governance to allow African countries to reach modernization through their own path and their own specificity and their own context. And that was really quite interesting. Why I was saying that China is taking Africa on his political alliance on the international stage is given that you look into what China is promoting in Africa, because people may think that no, China is going to try to export its political models in Africa, which I believe that's not going to happen. China is not really interested to that, because if China wants to fight the international norms that we do have right now, social democracy, liberal democracy, and everything, the free markets and the way we understand that, China doesn't need to go against it. It just needs to go against its universality. It needs to go against the fact that those norms, those lifestyles, those ideas have become the norms, the universal norms upon which we are judging if a country is democratic or if it's not democratic, if a country is friendly or is not friendly. So China is just going to promote a different set of norms. Basically, if we do have a lot of political system out there, we do have a lot of path to democracy, a lot of path to modernization, a lot of path to development, what's going to happen is going to be that there won't be no single norm that's going to be imposed on African country or any global South country where we're going to say, based on that, we're going to judge you whether or not you are democratic or not. And by doing that, China is just creating a coalition of countries say, yeah, we are going to do things our own way. And when China say that, of course, African countries are happy. Of course, those head of states are happy because we've been hearing that beside the head of state, we've been hearing that from many African intellectuals that it's time for Africa to develop its own path to democracy, its own path to development. And when China says, here I am, I can show you the blueprint because I've been able to succeed without following the blueprint that came of Western countries. I've been able to modernize, to get people out of poverty, to really develop without the need of changing who I am. I did that by keeping my identity. And China sharing that experience is going to really set a norm and trigger things that I do believe that in the years to come we are going to see we're going to see an emergence of different political method and approaches on the continent and also in the global south. That's going to really to question the universality of the norms that we know now, the liberal democracy, the justice and fairness. And mind you, when you take into account the situation in Gaza, the way the Western world is responding to that, it's just making the argument that China is making even much more solid to many African countries that, the international system that they are talking about is not as fair as they pretend it's to be. So I want to take you in a new era, in a new context, in a new environment. And this is what China is offering on the table, a forward-looking vision, a forward political-looking vision of the international system where they say, come with me, Africa, we are going to make that happen. So, how many African countries are going to follow? I'm not really sure because African countries, what I've noticed in many countries, they are not ideologically driven. They are most of opportunistically driven, and some of them will follow, some will not follow, some will follow based on the interest they're getting from China at that exact moment. But that being put aside, it's really something worth noting. And I was mentioning earlier when I was talking on point 3 what China is going to put, what African country got. We had vocational training. I've been following that element for quite some time. It's really interesting how many vocational training that Chinese have been building in Africa, in collaboration with Chinese mining companies, with different Chinese companies, with Huawei in Africa, where we have vocational training where young Africans are learning jobs, are learning employments, they're learning new skills, and they're really being put out there as a labor force. It will be interesting. It's really going to be interesting because I think within 5 or 10 years we're gonna have a whole generations of young Africans who are going to tell you, yes, my first job I got it through a Chinese vocational training. I got what I got because of Chinese trained me in new technology and everything here and there. And this is the space where China is really now being much more present. And I think those who are worried about Chinese influence in Africa should be paying attention to those kind of elements instead of looking those $50 billion where really it means something, it also means nothing. But where China is really taking Africa in that space where it wants to show that, we can be the partner, we can be your partner of choices when it comes to development, and we can show you how to do it because we've done it before. And this is something that many Western countries are not able to say to African countries. Many of them cannot tell them that we were poor, you've seen us poor, and we are now rich, and you've seen us becoming rich. China is the only one who can say, 60 years ago, I was like you, and 60 years later, this is what I've done to get where I am today. And this is the message that China is going to share for the next 3 years. And they say they're going to build China-Africa study centers, training political parties and leaders. It's going really to be interesting how China is going to influence and shape the mind of future leaders in Africa to be able to understand that there is different political mode, different political system out there that can be used to develop to get the same goal. And China say it's not about copying China, it's about you using your own method, your own system, given your own context, your own history, your own background, so you can get to that modernization and development. And this is going to be interesting. This is why I say that really this is where China is really getting Africa to that space where you are with me. You are with me in that new era. And talking about new era, China raised China-Africa relation to another stage, and I'm gonna read it down because it's really quite long. So China-Africa relation have been raised to a all-weather China-Africa community with a shared future for the new era. Clear as that, China is taking Africa in that space of saying that we have to build together, because the both of us were the victim of this international system, and we have to fight for a new international system, and let's go make that happen. And yes, it's China is putting that on the table. Are they going to follow through? It's really hard to say for now, but this is what China puts during this FOCAC. There was a lot of announcement in terms of China raise it and Mali relation to strategic relations, raise relationship with Rwanda, same with South Africa. South Africa that has been rose, China-South Africa relation that has been rose to a all-round strategic cooperative partnership in a new era. This is also a different level, and here I'm gonna show you a visual so you kind of understand where Chinese diplomatic relations stand and where many African countries stand. It's the visual came from Merrick, a think tank that follows China politics, and they published it in 2021. So between 2021 and now, the numbers have changed and everything, but the structure remained the same. So I'm gonna take a look on this, and it's gonna be really interesting. So you have here the different levels of China relations. So we have like the basic level here, partnership. You have cooperative partnership, strategic cooperative partnership, and strategic partnership of coordination. This is the highest level, and we have different subgroup here. And many African countries are here in the level of where we're not friendly partnership in the level in the level of cooperative partnership. Like many African countries are still a strategic partnership. In the level of strategic partnership, 3.3 cooperative strategic partnership. Many African countries are there. The relationship have been raised to that level, and also to strategic partnership as well in general. So but South Africa has been rose to somewhere which I didn't see the reference here, but I think it's somewhere here just below Russia as a all-round strategic cooperative partnership in new era. What does it mean concrete? What does it mean in concrete action? We don't know yet, but we're gonna see that how it's going to unfold. But what I can tell you at this level is like only countries that are ready, that are prepared, that are really serious into how they engage to China, those are going to take advantage of those changes, strategic relation, or China opening its market, whatever. It's up to us to be ready for that. It's really up to us to really just be ready. Just be ready to take advantage of our China-Africa relation. So my final comment. So what's China-Africa relation should be about? It should be about, I think, politics. China trying to shape Africa to be the partners that it wants to be on the international stage. And it's really up to us to now to put in place mechanism to follow through. Chinese commitment. We need to be able in 2027 in Brazzaville, in Congo-Brazzaville, because this is where the next FOCAC will be happening, in Congo-Brazzaville. We need to be able to get there and to know how much China has delivered to its promises of 2024. What was the real commitment? What was done? What was not done? What was the problem? What was the the hiccups during the way, but we need to be able to get to that point of evaluation, because this has been a complaint for so long, to get to those FOCAC meetings and not being able to really to evaluate how much China really fulfilled its commitment. 2021 was there. We're still not clear on really how many percent of the 2021 9 action plan was really fulfilled. Of course, when you read the Beijing Declaration, because it's diplomatic, because it's politics, they all tell you, no, China is fulfilled. But on the ground, I think we need to pay much more attention. And I do believe that African countries and governments should really now put in place mechanisms where they follow through, they pay attention on Chinese commitment, and what was supposed to be, to make sure that what was supposed to be done, it's done. And when and if it's not done, what they should be doing to readjust that. So this is going to be my last comment, and I thought that's going to make it in 30 minutes, but I realized that I got to 40 or to 45 minutes. So this was my final comment, and this is the wrap I'm making on this FOCAC, and I hope that you are able to understand and to get some useful information about what this FOCAC was about, and to follow us in the China Global South. We spent the last month, the month of July and August, to really make an extensive coverage of FOCAC on what's to look for, and during the FOCAC we did an extensive coverage as well, and this is also I think for me on my side will be the final video on FOCAC, at least for now, because there's nothing new to cover in the meantime. So visit our website in English, ChinaGlobalSouth.com, in French, ProjetAfricaChine.com, to really see the different coverage we've done around this FOCAC. It was really my pleasure to share with you my insights, my views, my reading about this FOCAC. I don't know what was your reading, and feel free to share it in the comment, and I'm gonna take time to read them and maybe to make an exchange around that to see what's to look for. You're an African, you follow it, you watched it. What's your aspiration? What's your hope? What you think that we should be doing to improve our relationship with China? And I do believe personally that China is not going to leave Africa. China is going to be there. It's really up to us to find a way on how we are going to work together for our interest, to make our interest work. We already said that before with the geopolitical tension, that we're not going to choose between China and the rest of the world. We are going to choose us, and if us means working with China, we're going to work with China. If us meaning working with China and other partners, we're going to do that, and we're not going to pick side. And I think that we really owe to ourselves to put all the chances on our side to make sure that China is really the partner that we want it to be for us in Africa. And that was it. That was my final comment. If you like the content that we are doing, you've seen, click the subscribe button and the notification bell so you get notified every time we drop a new video about China in the Global South. My name is Christian Geraud. I'm the Africa editor of the China Global South, and it was my pleasure to give you this wrap-up of FOCAC 2024. See you next week or next time for another video of China in the Global South. Bye-bye.